Good evening. Welcome to the 22nd Annual Stakeholder Dialogue here at the University of St. Thomas. It's my pleasure to welcome you to what I hope will be a very interesting evening. My name is Daryl Kane. I'm a professor in the Ethics and Business Law Department here. I'd like to begin by thanking our generous benefactors. Tonight's Stakeholder Dialogue has been underwritten by David and Barbara Koch, and we also have, as well as is indicated on the projected screen here, support from the Center for Ethical Business Cultures and the Veritas Institute here at the University of St. Thomas. There's a book in the lobby that looks like this. You have an opportunity to get one of these books for free. It's a really special book. It's an interview between David Koch, who was the CEO of Greco Corporation, and UST MBA students. So it's a bit more than a memoir. It really is a special book, and I encourage you to pick up a free copy on your way out tonight. Let me just deal with a few logistical things before we start. If you wouldn't mind silencing your cell phone and every electronic device now, that would be great. Also, we're going to try to enter the 21st century here by allowing you to tweet questions tonight. So if you want to tweet, our hashtag is hashtag BCGood. So if questions occur to you that you would like to address to the speakers, feel free to tweet tonight. For those of us who don't have Twitter accounts, the old-fashioned way of submitting a question is via a note card. When you came in, you were given a 3x5 note card. So as questions occur to you, please feel free to write the question on the note card and then pass it down towards the end of the aisle. We'll have staff coming up and down and collecting the questions as the event unfolds. Tonight's stakeholder dialogue centers on the question of how beneficial benefit corporations truly are. I think the topic is timely for a number of reasons. First of all, the state of Minnesota just passed, effective January 1st of this year, a public benefits corporation incorporation law. We already have at least 29 firms that are benefit corporations here in Minnesota, so we're off to a very fast track. It's a topic of interest locally. In addition, the majority of American states now do allow for public benefit corporations. The general requirement for becoming a benefit corporation is that you have to have a stated public benefit purpose and then file some kind of annual benefit report showing how you've realized your purpose. Usually there's also a requirement that you have to be certified by a third-party independent agent who evaluates how you're stacking up vis-a-vis your stated purpose. The certification frequently considers dimensions such as employee engagement, impact on the environment, corporate governance structure, and so forth. Here at UST, we've already begun to do some preliminary research on motivations for people who are starting benefit corporations. And the number one motivation, as you would expect, is people want to do some public good. But the second primary motivator is a desire to be able to control where and how profits are allocated. And thirdly, a desire to focus on people and planet as well as profits. So that you have this exploding growth of the benefit corporations, but of course, along with any new trend comes some questions and some doubts. So some critics have doubted whether or not benefit corporations are going to be able to successfully attract capital. Another issue is how will benefit corporations be held accountable? Because we're basically looking to market mechanisms to keep the public's attention focused on benefit corporations, yet some critics are saying it's very difficult to find information about what the public benefit corporations have done. It's hard to find their annual benefit report. So there may be an accountability issue. So those are a couple of the challenging questions and of the sort that we'll be posing during tonight's event. Tonight we're going to hear from Michael Hannigan, who is the president and co-founder of the California benefit corporation called Give Something Back Office Supplies, and from Professor Patricia Werhane, who's the Professor Emeritus in Business Ethics at DePaul University. After their presentations, David Rodbourne on my right, a member of our Center for Business Ethics Culture and a good researcher in his own right, is going to moderate a question and answer period for us. I'll introduce Mr. Hannigan, and then David Rodbourne will introduce Pat Werehain. Mr. Hannigan's firm, Give Something Back Office Supplies, was one of the first benefit corporations in California. Prior to the event, Michael and I were talking, and he said that California passed its benefit corporation law in 2012, and I said, were you first in line? And he said, no, Patagonia beat him, on January 2nd, but his company was second in line to register as a benefit corporation in California. Modeled on Paul Newman's own food company, Give Something Back donates its profits to a variety of nonprofit groups that are selected by customers and employees. It's rather an innovative approach. The firm began as a traditional corporation and then converted to a benefit corporation. I think we're going to hear a little bit tonight about what motivated that switch. I have to say that this firm has been incredibly inventive in coming up with ways to better serve the community. The performance is especially impressive given the super thin margins in the office supply industry, which are among the lowest in the retail industry. Mr. Hannigan will speak until 6:15, and then we'll hear from Professor Werhane. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Michael Hannigan.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes? Good. It's going to be a little bit of a crapshoot. I've had this nagging cough for like a month and a half. But I was at DePaul yesterday, and I made it through 2 classes without, hacking myself to death and even actually coughing occasionally. So I'll try to control my breath, but occasionally I'm going to cough, but it's all right. It's not painful. And I also noticed, this reminds me of like a casino in Las Vegas. There's no clocks on the wall, so I don't know how, I don't know how I'm supposed to remind myself, because I could drone on for hours, believe me. So somebody's got to warn me when I have some time limit coming up, okay? I'm also told there's some benefit corporations in the audience. Are there any here yet? Yes. I think you got more benefit corporations in Minnesota after like a couple of months than California still has. I don't think we have 29 there. I'm not exactly sure how many we have, but congratulations on that. So I guess the statute was just passed a couple months ago. So what I want to do is a couple of things. First of all, thanks for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here talking about this topic, because this topic is I think, so timely. There's so many important inflection points happening now, partly related to the statutory changes that are happening in states, which is really the first time in the history of United States corporate law that social missions can be have legal status within the articles of incorporation and charters of companies, so that companies are the social missions that are identified by benefit corporations trump even the stockholder rights of investors. And that fact right there has inhibited a lot of benefit corporations from attracting the kind of private capital without feeling that their social mission is in jeopardy, because previously, with a regular corporation, companies have to operate in the interest of their stockholders. So the stockholders legally would have the right to challenge the social mission if it compromised their interests. But the benefit corporation allows that problem to be overcome, which for our company, which gives all of its profits away to nonprofits organizations, that's a fairly risky proposition if you invite in private investors who are expecting a return on their investment. So that and finally the beginning of conversations about how to drive the kind of sympathetic capital to benefit corporations is really beginning to happen. I'm leaving here, as a matter of fact, to go to the Council on Foundations, which is having its annual conference in San Francisco. And for the first time, they're having a serious conversation at the very highest levels about how to create a pathway from the really $1.5 trillion that is embedded in the endowment funds, the investment funds that foundations live on, to open the pathway for those funds as kind of community capital to find its way into benefit corporations to help us scale if our missions can be seen in congruence with them achieving their missions. And that pathway has been blocked up to now. There are some LC3s and PRIs that have been developed over the past to allow foundations to invest in social enterprises. But the pathway for large-scale capital to come to a company like Give Something Back to allow us to grow to the size of a Staples, so that instead of donating a couple $1 million, we can go donate $1.5 billion a year, which is what Staples made a couple years ago on their $30 billion in sales. That's the goal. But in order to get to that goal, you have to have capital that allows you to attract the kind of talent and put the kind of infrastructure in place. So I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, our company. Because I think nothing really has been said up to now. We're all talking about benefit corporations, the community benefit, et cetera, et cetera. But the most important fundamental thing to understand in our company and in every other company like our company is our first priority is to our customers. So if we don't satisfy our customers, if we can't provide products to our customers cheaper with better service than Staples, Office Depot, or formerly Office Max, or all the other independent office supply companies, we're not going to get the business. We're a business-to-business enterprise. We're the third largest office supply company in California. So we're not, a bunch of hippies selling tie-dye T-shirts on Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley. We're like for real. Our goal is to really crush the brains out of our competitors in the marketplace, metaphorically speaking, of course, understanding that that's their goal as well, is to beat us in winning business. Because our goal is to take care of our customers, convince our customers that based on their needs, and their needs are fiduciary. So if you're the purchasing agent for the University of California, and you have you're putting a bid for a $5 million office supply contract out on the public market, you're going to get envelopes with all the companies that want to compete for that business. You're going to pick the one with the lowest number on the bottom. Okay? So if we're not the lowest number on the bottom, we're not going to win that business. And we shouldn't win that business because, first of all, those are tax dollars that are being spent. They have a fiduciary responsibility to spend as little money as they can on their office supplies so that they can pay the teachers more and subsidize the students' tuitions and things like that. So I think the first thing to remember, and it's oftentimes the last thing that is said, is that our business success is a function of our success in taking care of our customers. And when we fail to do that, we will fail to survive in the marketplace because our goal is to do one thing: make as much profit as we can responsibly in a competitive marketplace where we're up every day, proving ourselves against companies that are trying to take us out, and we're trying to take them out. And once we earn the profit, our goal is to give all that profit back into the community in a way that the community, through some democratic process, decides is the most useful use of that money. I'll talk about that process in a little while. But we started, in 1991. And I had, I had 15 years of experience in the office products industry. And by the way, I'm an accidental business person. I went to college at UC San Diego. And I was a math and a science student. My goal was to be a marine biologist at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography in San Diego. But I landed on the college campus in 1969, and at that period of time, the college campuses were exploding with social activism. The anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, all these things were happening in the late 60s, early 70s. And if you were a student, came out of high school, landed on one of those campuses, and UC San Diego was one of them, you had to address this issue. You either embraced it, you rejected it, but you could not ignore it. So I was one of those people that embraced it. So I became a social activist, and as a consequence, my undergraduate degree is in philosophy. Okay, so I want to tell this kind of random walk in the park about my career, and then I wanted to go to Berkeley because Berkeley was where you wanted to be in the early 70s, late 60s. So I went to graduate school at the School of Criminology in Berkeley in a doctoral program in criminology, which is essentially sociology and policy. It wasn't like a police school, or you weren't studying to be a parole agent or anything like that. You were studying social policy in the area of sociology and crime and deviance. But before I graduated, we were such a hotbed of misanthropes from the point of view of the administration that they closed the School of Criminology and merged it with the Bolt School of Law at UC Berkeley. And I didn't want to graduate with a law degree, so I went to the Graduate Placement Center and I wanted a job. And I took a job at the Xerox Corporation. So in 1975, right after I left my graduate program, I became a collection agent at the Xerox Corporation. And I began this bifurcated life. So during the day, I would make my living learning and operating within the context of a very competitive office products company. Xerox was the Google of its day. It was a virtual monopoly. This is before any of the Japanese copier companies came in the United States. They had an infinite amount of money, very progressive, but it was also the best place to learn how business functions in a very competitive marketplace. So I spent the next 15 years jumping from company to company as the Japanese came in with their products. I ran some of their companies, But I became an expert in the office products world. I learned every aspect of it, sales end of it, the marketing of it, the finance administration, blah, blah, blah. And then after hours, I would do what I felt I was placed on this earth to do, which was, raise hell in a social and political, protest way. So I would protest U.S. foreign policy in Nicaragua or Central America or whatever. But I had two lives. I had my community service life and my making a living life. And like many people, that's many people here, I'm sure have that same thing. They make a living in a way, and then they do their contribution to their community and what feels good to them after hours. Well, I found a way to merge those two. And the way I found it was, coincidentally, I also got divorced in 1990, the year before I started my company. And it's not unusual for recently divorced men to eat spaghetti sauce out of a bottle for dinner on a regular basis. So as I was shopping for my dinner on a regular basis at Safeway, I noticed that there were several brands of products. And one of the brands of products was Franco-American spaghetti sauce, and it cost $1.69. One of them was Ragu spaghetti. I don't know what the brands were. But one of them was this brand called Newman's Own. It had a big picture of Paul Newman's face on it, and it had a big sticker on the front that said, all profits from the sale of this product are donated to charity. And as a consumer, I'm looking to take care of my spaghetti sauce needs that night. But here's an opportunity for me to use my purchasing decision, not just to get what I wanted as a consumer at a fair and equal price, but also to have my purchasing power support organizations that I supported in the community taking care of children's needs. So the light bulb went on. I said, boy, this is an interesting business model. This is a competitive. They just won my business because they met my needs as a consumer. And the result of that is not that Paul Newman gets richer, but that the community is enriched by a donation to support the community needs. So that business model resonated deeply with me. And I also understood at that point, partly through my educational background, but the main mechanism in our society that is responsible for the creation and the distribution of wealth is the private marketplace, is the private sector. The government obviously has its role, the nonprofit sector has its role, but where the action is in the private sector. That's where wealth is created, and that's the mechanism that allows wealth to be distributed in a particular way. So I understood the power of the marketplace to create and distribute wealth, and I found a way through the Newman's Own model to use the tools that I had accumulated accidentally by this kind of weird turn of my life into the business world to become this expert in running and managing office products businesses, to create a business model similar to Newman's Own in the industry that I was aware of. So I found myself a business partner who had a complementary set of skills. I'm very good at administration, finance, logistics. I suck at sales. And you cannot have a business in my industry if you suck at sales, unless you have somebody that doesn't suck at sales. So I had a business partner that their strength was in sales. So together, we put together $40,000. We each had $20,000 in savings. And that was the initial capital that we used to build our business plan to go out and sell office products to businesses in the same way that I had learned to sell copy machines and fax machines to businesses. And so that was in 1991. The company has grown since then. It's been profitable we started in September. We were profitable in our second year, 1992. And every year since, we've been profitable, and we've grown to be the third largest office products company in California. And we'll very soon be the number two. Not because we're growing, but because Office Depot is going to be bought by Staples. Bumping us up a notch. Assuming that the SEC allows that merger to go through. They probably will. So the business is intended to take the profit out of the marketplace through fair competition and aggressive competition based on skill sets matched up against your competitors to earn as much profit as you can. But what we have done is we have eliminated the private stockholder as an interested beneficiary. So all of our profits are donated to nonprofit organizations in the areas that we touch as a company. Okay, so what we have to do to get the profit is not fundamentally different. I mean, we won the UC Berkeley contract because we are the lower number, and that's a big contract. When we win, it's because the customer thinks we're a better deal, not because we're going to give their profit that we make from them off to the community. That very rarely happens, although there's some exceptions. Uber is one of the exceptions, one of our customers that we screwed up our original bid, and we lost horribly, and they called us up and said, boy, you really screwed up this bid, didn't you? And we said, sorry. And they said, would you like a second chance? So, they basically walked us into winning the bid because they wanted to do business with us. But that's fairly rare. And, that's just a reflection of some of the crazy ideas that some of those young people that start these billion-dollar companies have in their heads. But our goal is to use the power of the marketplace to create wealth on behalf of the community. Because our understanding is that, this is the richest country in the history of the world. The combination of the wealth and the power of this country is unprecedented in the history of the world. So there's really no reason that, a middle-class family can't afford to send their kid to a quality university. By the way, when I went to the University of California in San Diego, I think it's ranked now number 3 in the quality public universities. My tuition? 0. We had no tuition. It was all paid for by tax dollars back then. And in a time when there was ample tax dollars and my parents didn't have to suffer in order to send me to go to college. But those kinds of opportunities are really not available to most middle-class families now. And it's not because the resources aren't available to support those programs. It's because the institutions that connect the resources to the needs in a way that most of us, rich, poor, powerful, or powerless, would see as fair and equitable and just. So it's not, our view isn't that there's a bunch of rich and powerful, greedy people out there saying, how do we capture all the wealth for ourselves and keep everyone else behind? That's not what happens. It's the institutions that routinely produce the community outcomes that produce the incredible disparities in wealth and opportunities that exist in our society now. And I think that's one of the reasons we're having this conversation now. That's one of the reasons why there's benefit corporation laws now. It's because I think there's a broadened, overriding sense that things have gotten out of balance. The disparities that exist between regular people's opportunities and other limited people's opportunities is so far away from what's possible, given the prosperity that's available in this nation as a whole, that we need to start re-engineering some of the institutions that can produce outcomes that are more compatible with what we would consider to be fair and equitable. Now, back in the old days, in my kind of college days, people who thought like that, they would never go into business. We would be sociology teachers, we'd go into law school, we go into public health, we go into the nonprofit sector, but we would never see business as an available tool to create fundamental change in the flow of resources to connect with unmet community needs. It was not something that even would cross our minds. But you can't go to a campus now, to a business school especially, and not find the same people that were clamoring to get into law school and the sociology departments now in the business schools, looking to use business not just as a vehicle to accomplish their personal financial goals, but to do it in a way that's compatible with their community sense of responsibility. And I think we've come a long, long way, certainly from when we started in 1991, to creating not just kind of a one-off, exceptional kind of experience, but to create the kind of institutional permanence that is of the same kind of permanence as what we would normally say is the nonprofit sector. I mean, the nonprofit sector, we all know what it is, right? We don't, without defining it, we know that there's a thing called the nonprofit sector. It's more than $1 trillion segment of our society. But they don't have a nonprofit sector in France, like ours, or Japan. They got the state, government apparatus, and they got the private sector. They have some middle stuff, but they don't have anything like a nonprofit sector with the power and the ability to kind of soften the edges of what's left behind when those two institutions together can't produce the quality of life that we think is acceptable. In this country, the nonprofit sector developed over about 100 years, gradually, but it has come to the point where it is seen as an essential component to create the kind of conditions that we would all expect to be available to somebody in a country like ours with the prosperity that we have available to the nation as a whole. So I think what is developing now is a fourth sector. And, 50 years, 25 years now, we'll look back and we'll see not, a couple of Give Something Backs and a Patagonia and a Cliff Bar and a Warby Parker and an Etsy and stuff like that, but you'll see a sector that people will say, oh, the fourth sector, I know what that is. That's just like the nonprofit sector. There'll be 4 sectors, including a massive amount of people who are trained in business, trained in competition in the marketplace, but do it on behalf of a set of stakeholders that are embedded in the charters and bylaws of the companies that mandate measurement in terms of what the impact of this business is on some aspect of the quality of life in the community. And the range of these corporations will have all kinds of focuses. Some of them will be involved in, green tech and sustainability and employee rights and blah, blah, blah. Ours happens to be income redistribution. I mean, our main principle of our company, the organizing principle from the beginning of 1991, we've always been called Give Something Back, is to use the marketplace to create wealth on behalf of the community. And we've continued to do that and be profitable and sustainable in doing that. Now, when the community is your central stakeholder, there are things that you do a little bit differently of nature. So, for example, it doesn't make any sense intellectually, if you're a profitable company, not to pay for your employees' health benefits if in the back door you're going to be funding through your donations public health institutions that handle people that don't have health benefits paid for by their employers. So it doesn't make any logical sense. So even though that is more expensive for us than our competitors, as long as we're profitable, we're willing to take a share of that profit and subsidize the employees' health care expenses in a way that prevents us from having to do that through the back door by donations through public health agencies. And it makes sense. And if you were all sitting on the board of directors or the governing body of Give Something Back, you'd come to the same conclusion that it's there. And there's nobody in the room that says, wait a minute now, my dividend is going to be reduced this year from my investment. There's nobody that takes that point of view. The point of view is is the net result of the decision positive or negative for the central stakeholder with this community, realizing that there are sacrifices and compromises between all the stakeholders, the community of stakeholders, the nonprofit beneficiaries, the employees, the vendors, all the stakeholders that are affected by the company. But the process by which decisions are made, when the community is at a high level of priority in the decision-making process of business decisions, sometimes the decisions are different. I'll give you a counterexample. I think 5 years ago, Staples had the most successful year in the history of the office products industry. I mean, they had $30 billion in sales. You talked about a low-margin industry. We are somewhere between 1% and 4% on a good year. So you sell $1 million worth of products, you make between $10,000 and $40,000 in profit. It's a very low-margin, high-volume industry. So Staples, 5 years ago, did $30 billion, and they hit 9% profit. They made like $1 billion, maybe $2 billion, something like that, in profit. So it was a boom year. That same year, they decided to cut their company's contribution to their employees' health care plan by 50%. Now why would a company do that? They didn't wake up in the morning and say, okay, give me 5 ideas about how we screw our employees today. Let's cut their health care costs, or let's improve. That's not the way it happens. These are not greedy people. These are people like us who live in communities and care about their communities. But what they had to do is they had to compete with Office Depot, Office Max, who had recently cut their employees' contributions to their health plans. So they were kind of required to do that in order to meet the needs of their stockholders to achieve their goals. And I'm sure they were kicking themselves, but it was the responsible thing to do relative to the interests of their management prerogatives to serve the stockholders' interest, to make their stock competitive with their competitor stock in the public marketplace. So it's not because they're evil, horrible people. It's because the mandates of their stakeholder model requires them to take actions that sometimes would seem to be different than the actions that we would take. But on the other hand, if we started losing money, which we did in 2008, we didn't actually lose money in 2008, but right after the collapse, we found ourselves, our first quarter in 2008, losing something like $350,000 in our first quarter. So we realized, oh my God, there's only one way we can stop the hemorrhaging, is to cut payroll. There was no other way, because there's no other fixed cost since we don't have inventory that we can, so we had to cut payroll. So we had to cut $40,000 a month out of our payroll. So how does a company that is a community stakeholder business do that? Well, we brought people together and we said, everyone's going to suffer. So we eventually came to the conclusion, and I bet if we, as a group, we talked about this, we'd come to the same conclusion. We cut the employees into 5 segments. The low-income earners got no reduction. The second tier got a 5% reduction. The third tier got a 10% reduction. The fourth tier got a 15%, and the top tier got a 20% reduction. Figuring if you're making $150,000, you can better afford to lose 20% of your income for a period of time than somebody who's making $30,000 can take anything. And that, it shared the wealth, it shared the pain in a way that considered the net impact on all the stakeholders. And then when business bounced back, of course, we restored the payroll back to where it was. But it was a process of the decision that was motivated by what is the impact of the decision on the stakeholders that are going to be affected by the decision, without having the investing class being at the table saying, well, that doesn't work for me. Okay? Let me go briefly to how we donate the money. So I don't know, there's a couple hundred people in the room, 150 people in the room. If I were to ask each one of you what your favorite nonprofit cause is in your community, you'd have 150 different answers. Some of you feel like domestic violence is the issue of the day. Some people would say climate change. Some people would say homelessness. Some people would say, controlling the panhandlers out on the street. We'd have 150 different answers. And that's because we have 150 different life experiences that bring us to 150 different conclusions. Each of them as valid as the next. So usually corporate philanthropy is a reflection of the C-suite. Okay, so the CEO happens to love the symphony, so symphony's struggling this year, we need to support the symphony. That's kind of T. Boone Pickens one year gave $150 million to the University of Arkansas golf program. I'm guessing that he's a golfer. But I'm also guessing that if you ask his employees who to give the $150 million to, well, not a lot of them would have given it to the University of Arkansas or whatever golf program. But that was his prerogative because it was his money to give. So we have a different approach. We feel we're agents of community service. So in order to, if you were our customers and you were from San Diego and you guys were from the Bay Area, San Francisco, you guys were from Seattle or Portland or Sacramento, we would send you a ballot with about 50 or 100 different nonprofit organizations from Sacramento, where 15% of our business comes. And then we would ask you to tell each one of you as a customer employee, or one of our employees to send us your 10 top votes. We would calculate those votes, and if 10% of all your votes went for the, Save the Whale, 10% of the money of the 15% of the profits from our company would go to the Save the Whale. Now, and believe it or not, for 5 years running, in the Sacramento region, the SPCA was the top vote-getting organization, 5 years running. I love animals. I had a tasty one for lunch today, But, wouldn't be my choice. It would be my mother's choice, They're helpless creatures. They depend upon us. I would give it to the food bank. But, that's me. You might give it to something else. And that's fair, totally fair, as long as we each have access to the decision process. Our interests that are motivated by our living experiences in our different communities should decide where the profits that came from those communities go back. So that's the process, in theory, the way it works. So the money's made in the community, it goes back into the community according to the needs assessed by the people who are in the best position to assess what's needed and what's working in that community. So that's the process, okay? Now, we don't give it all away the day we make it. We're a business, so we have to plan for the future. So next year's business plan is to grow 15%. We have some experience in this, so we know we have to have a certain amount of cash available to us through our bank lines of credit. We have to have a certain amount of liquidity to maintain our, good relationships with our funders or with our bankers. So we can decide each year how much cash we can hold on to in order to keep ourselves financially safe and sound so that we can survive another year and grow. And then we give everything else away. So what that means over time is that we've given away, since we started in 1991, we've given away 92% of all the profit we've made since we started. Okay, so if you were to look at our balance sheet, which is a summary of all of our assets and liabilities, you would see 8% of all the profits we've made since we started, that we still have in our bank account. Now, we'll give it away next year, and then we'll give away part of next year's, et cetera. But that's the planning process. But, companies give their profits away anyway, sometimes more, sometimes less. Apple's, I think, giving away $50 million this year in their accumulated dividends. They got $160 million in the bank. Not even in the bank. So they're giving away $50 million of that to their stockholders, one of which happens to be my mother, because my brother convinced her when Apple was at like $11 a share to buy 1,000 shares, which is now worth, by the way, $2.6 million. That's how, and because she's such a wizard in investment. That's the crazy thing about investing. It's like the one good investment my dad made on the advice of my brother, who's an Apple guy. They're rich. So anyway, just an aside, kind of a cynical aside on how wealth is earned in America in some cases. I'll get a fourth of it. You know, so I'm not complaining a whole lot. Anyway, so that's how the company functions. Now, 23 years ago, it was generally seen as a weird idea. No question about it. But in the past 23 years, a whole movement has emerged along with us to recognize the power of business to create some kind of transformative change in the way that resources connect to needs broadly through our society. I think more and more people are not avoiding the business tool, but embracing the business tool and twisting it into a form that produces social benefit as well as economic benefit. And the evidence of that, I think, is so strong, is that, first of all, you've got national organizations similar to like the Chambers of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers, all these kind of trade associations that are the accumulated wisdom and stability of industry. They exist now in the socially responsible business world. Social Venture Network, the Sustainable Business Alliance. There's hundreds of them, but there's a couple of really big ones nationally that have thousands and thousands and thousands of members. BALI, Business Alliance for the Living Local Economy, has got 17,000 business members, and they're mostly small businesses, but they're 17,000 business members that pay dues and go to national conferences and drink beer together when they get together and all that kind of stuff that people do at conferences. So the organizations exist. The metrics, the organizations, the ability to measure success in relationship to social goals is way, way beyond what it used to be. The organization B Corp, that's probably the biggest and most successful. These are Wharton people who have taken on the task of helping companies measure the impact of what they do on various community constituencies. And it's very scientific now. There's all kinds of examples of that. So companies now have the ability, and consumers have the ability, to evaluate companies on the basis of what their measurements are in terms of their impact on community. Every business school's probably got a net impact chapter. Is there one here? Mm-hmm. Okay, net impact chapter. Thousands and thousands of students in the business school are looking to link their business careers to their sense of social responsibility. That didn't exist 20 years ago. The capital's beginning to flow to support the companies as they begin to grow. We had our first benefit corporation, or B Corp, certified B Corp, went public a couple days ago. Etsy raises all kinds of interesting questions, but it's pretty big. Ben & Jerry's was certified as a B Corp, even though they're part of a multinational consortium. So there's thousands of companies now that have self-identified and proven long-term success that shows this business model is not just a kind of a fly-by-night thing, that it has permanence and capability. But the most important thing of all, I think, the second most important thing, is the development of this benefit corporation law. Because what it does is it allows for companies that are specifically designed to produce social benefits and not just financial benefits for the owners, to protect that mission against the threat of shifting ownership. So, for example, if somebody out there was a huge philanthropist and a saintly person and wanted to invest and give something back before we were a benefit corporation, we could have taken your investment. You were totally committed to the mission, didn't want to return on and then you die, and then of course your greedy kids take over the stock and they say, I don't believe what my dad believed or my mom believed, so I own 10% of the company, I want 10% of the profits. And they would win that case in court. They would never win that case in court now as the benefit corporation, because our bylaws say that the company profits are going to be donated solely to nonprofit organizations. So investors who are interested in sharing that mission can invest in the company now without the company having to worry about them changing their mind or selling their stock to somebody else who changes their mind. That opens up, because we had $40,000 in capital. That's the last capital we've ever had. But we need more capital to get to staple size, or to get to $200 million or $500 million or $1 billion, which is clearly possible, but you need capital, and capital will bring you talent and infrastructure that you need to compete at that level. And so the formation of the benefit corporation, I think, is the last missing piece that allows for the stabilization of benefit corporations to exist in a safe environment, as radical or as serious as they are about identifying a social mission without being challenged by the neutral stockholder interest. Okay, and the final piece is, as I said, I'm going to, the Council of Foundations is having their annual conference in San Francisco as soon as I leave here tomorrow morning, and I'm on a salon. And for the first time, the top people at the Council of Foundations are talking about how to unlock the $1.5 trillion that foundations collectively have in their endowment funds, which they invest to keep their foundations going. Not their program grants, but their endowment funds, because they all own stocks and bonds. They're trying to figure out a way to link that dollars as capital investments in benefit-type corporations so they can invest in private corporations' efforts that sync up with their mission of their foundations to use their capital to allow those companies like Give Something Back to scale. So if we could get that kind of capital available, it's already, some of it's available through Skoll and OMDR foundations and progressive foundations that do that anyway. But I think that piece will really show what the benefit corporation movement in the broad sense, the socially responsible business movement in a broad sense, can do to take care of its customers first and to take some of that wealth-producing capability and do it more responsibly and then transfer some of that wealth back to the community directly. So that's I think, over the arc of the 20 years of my career, that's what I've seen, how far we've come from what was just kind of experimental at first to the point where it's not going anywhere, it's going to get bigger, and 50 years from now, we'll look back and we'll say, oh, yeah, American society, that's the government, that's the state, that's the government sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and the fourth sector, the social enterprise sector, or whatever you want to call it, call all kinds of stuff. But that's, I think, the good news. Look, we still have to do it, and congratulations to a couple of people here who are kind of on that path, but a lot of us are going to be on that path in the near future, so that's what I'm going to say. Thank you. I didn't even cough that much. Is that mine or yours?
That's yours. Wow, I think we've got a really enthusiastic description of as you talked about, the arc of development over your career and in society. And to a couple of our colleagues here, I think we need to add a new sector to our schema of business and corporate responsibility in America. Patricia Werhane is the Wicklander Chair of Business Ethics Emeritus at DePaul University, where she also served as the Executive Director of the Institute for Business and Professional Ethics. She is also Ruffin Professor Emeritus at the University of Virginia, and currently she's a visiting scholar for research here at the University of St. Thomas. Pat is the author of 27 books and over 100 articles and book chapters.
It's more than James Patterson, I think.
But no sex.
Pat, there's still time.
That's why they don't sell as well as James Patterson.
There's still time, Pat. Her latest book is Obstacles to Ethical Decision-Making. Actually, haven't we all experienced that? With Hartman, Archer, Engelhardt, and Pritchard. It's Cambridge University Press in 2013. But I want to add that something that's close to our heart here at the Center for Ethical Business Culture, she is co-author of Corporate Responsibility, The American Experience, which is a project that we led along with Ken Goodpaster and Pat and three other distinguished scholars to create a history of corporate responsibility in the United States. And so we talked about this pressure over a 2-century period to push business in terms of standards and responsibilities. And this is perhaps one of the points of culmination of that kind of a story as you move forward. So we are delighted to have Pat with us today, and I invite her to share her thoughts.
Thank you. Well, I'm not going to share too many of them because I have 10 minutes. But I wanted to talk about the fourth sector. I see something different than Mike does. I see this as an enormous movement, and I remind you of Schumpeter, who talked about that capitalism is a form of creative destruction. We create new forms, the others get destroyed in the process. It seems to me that we're right on the edge of a new revolution. It's not a Marxist revolution, it's a revolution in new forms of capitalism. And I think this is, of course, extraordinarily exciting. And the benefit corporations are just one of a set of players. players. We see enormous numbers now of social entrepreneurs who are for-profit entrepreneurs with social missions. We see micro-lending expanding throughout the world, community banking, triple bottom line thinking, and a lot of emerging market enterprises that think of themselves as partners with the nonprofit sector rather than as enemies. And so we're just seeing an enormous creation of a different kind of wealth. And I think this is very, very exciting. And I wish I'll be around in 50 years to see what happens to this, because I think of it as going to be the third sector, and the fourth sector will be something else. I wanted to mention you a little historical context to this. The great-great-grandfather of the Benefit Corporation is an Indian corporation, Tata. Many of you have heard of Tata. It's about a 60 to 70 billion closely held company, Indian company, held by mostly, obviously, Indians. It was founded in 1868. And in its mission and its charter, it must donate 62% of all its profits every year to the Tata Foundation. And the Tata Foundation's mission is to improve the lives of Indian people in its scholarships, in finding jobs, poverty alleviation. So this is started early on, and we forget about Tata, but it was, so I call it the great-great-grandfather of the Benefit Corporation movement. One of my jobs is to raise some ethical issues, but I will. But I just have to. When you were talking, you didn't tell your best. He has wonderful stories. This man is so generous. So every day he brings in these office supplies at 5 in the morning. I saw that, and trucks go out and deliver them, and then the trucks come back empty. Well, he said to himself, "This is a waste of gasoline, because we've got trucks that have to come back, but there's nothing in them." So what does he do now? Those trucks collect e-waste from his customers, bring the e-waste back, and half his warehouse is filled with e-waste. Well, what do you do with that? Well, then the e-waste goes to a nonprofit whose trucks, by the way, are old trucks that he gave them, and they take this to this huge facility about as big as this room, and it's all filled with all this e-waste, even old televisions, an old record player. Remember those? You probably are not old enough. There were record players in the olden days. All this stuff, and new stuff, and then that company hires convicted felons, they're out of jail now, and they work on this, and they see what they can do. So I visited that. They had just rehabbed 500 computers that week, and then they either give those away to the needy, or they sell them for like $60 in their little store. I mean, it's just an amazing thing. So of course, people ask Mike, well, of course you get some profit from this, because there's a lot of very valuable metals in e-waste. He said, no, I'm not in the e-waste business. He said, we're in the office supply business. So, when you ask Mike, why does he do this? He thinks that's a weird question. He just does this, like for breakfast, and then goes on to do something. By the way, he has a whole bunch of other projects as well, but that's my favorite project, because it's really astonishing, amazing kind of thing, what he's done. There are obviously ethical issues, because I'm an ethicist, and we can find ethical issues, under chairs and everything. But one of the questions is, most of the benefit corporations now are small and privately held. So how can we hold them accountable? How do I really know you're giving away 80 to 90% of your profits every year? I happen to know you are, but how do I really know that? How can we keep them accountable? And I apologize for this gross story, but I just learned about this company today. There was a company, again, in California that had wonderful restaurants all over Berkeley and all over San Francisco. Everybody loved them. The guy made tons and tons of money, and he gave lots and lots of way to foundations for schools and roads and to the poor. It turned out that the reason he made so much money was not on the restaurants, but he was sex trafficking young girls. So is that a benefit corporation? You want to say no, but how do we link what a company does? And that's important, too, as well as what it does with its money. I'm sorry about the awful example, but it happens to be, unfortunately, true. And he's not a benefit corporation, but he's in jail. He just got out. He shouldn't have ever gotten out. That's right. So one of the things, how do we hold these companies accountable? The second question, for which I happen to know the answer, is that Mike and his partner could give themselves enormous salaries And then they just have a little profit, and they could give that away, but they themselves could accumulate a lot of money. Now, I happen to know they don't. They pay market wages to themselves. They never get a bonus, and their employees do, and they have that in their charter. So they can't exploit themselves or exploit the company. But do all benefit corporations do that? Well, I really don't know. And then, as you mentioned, what is the future of your company when you retire? And what about your children and your partner's children?
Somebody else's problem.
That's their problem, I know. I know we all say that, but we don't really mean it. And then finally, could we have a large publicly traded benefit corporation, like General Electric, for example, which is a company I happen to like, but could that be a benefit corporation? And if it was, one of the ethical issues is most of us who have pension funds have General Electric in the pension fund. And if General Electric was giving away 80% of its profits, some of us in the room are going to be hurting. So how do we get around that? I think there's a way to get around it, but I think those are interesting ethical issues that we're going to have to face as this goes as these benefit corporations go forward, and they will go forward. So thank you. Just had to tell you.
Well, if you can, thinking of any questions, Nancy and Patty are coming down the aisle looking for any cards that you might pass to the aisle, and we'll try to get to some of those. I had 3 questions here that I thought were really great, but they've pretty much answered them. So I'm going to try to punt and see if I can come up with something that'll at least get our conversation going. One of the things that I'd observed here, and this is true not only of Give Something Back Office Supply, but also of Patagonia and a number of other companies, they managed to create those companies before there was ever a benefit corporation statute. So you were in business as a privately held company for a long time doing what you do, and you did it without that structure. And I think you've touched on why that structure may be helpful going forward. Did you see other advantages now in terms of your ability to attract capital or other disadvantages to being in the benefit corporation category?
Well, let me clear up a couple of possible misconceptions. Benefit corporations are all structured differently. Not structured differently, but they have different themes which define them as benefit. Okay, so we're on the weird fringe. We give our profits away. All benefit corporations don't give their profits away. And I wouldn't even advocate all benefit corporations from giving their profits away. I know, for example, a benefit corporation that's mission is to create, they only manufacture fair trade soccer balls. That's their mission. The fair trade is the core benefit, the paying of the fair wage to the people who actually manufacture the soccer balls. But they pay themselves. They don't give their profits away. The result of what they do is their supply chain is more fairly paid. So of all the benefit corporations, some of them have sustainability things. What feature of benefit defines them is not necessarily giving their profits away. That's our thing. So I think I made it very clear. But the transformative thing for us with the benefit law is that we can now ask for capital. And people have tried to invest with us for years. People have tried to buy us many times because there's been lots of consolidations in the office products industry. But you can't trade equity to an investor with the realization that the investor can trade that investment to someone else, or they can pass it on to an heir that doesn't share their ideas. So if you trade equity to someone who doesn't share your mission is at risk, unless you can embed your mission in a legal structure that protects it. And the benefit corporation, from my point of view, I mean, there's a lot of flaky benefit corporations around. Because the benefit corporation rule in California, you could qualify as a benefit corporation if you put in your charter that you're providing child care for your employees. That's all you need to do. Now, you'll be held accountable for that, but that would qualify you. That's a social benefit. That would qualify you for being a benefit corporation. So what the ultimate benefit for the community is really remains to be seen. But from the entrepreneur's point of view, who sees themselves as a business person who's using their business specifically to produce a social benefit, it allows a level of protection that has been unprecedented. So I fully believe that we are now thinking about how to approach community capital whose interests are sympathetic and incongruent with our interests, like a foundation, for example, who's going to use their endowment and their program dollars to provide benefits to the community, I don't have a problem giving them a return on the investment, because they're going to do the same thing with the return that we're going to do with it, which is invested in the community in some definable, measurable, sympathetic way. So that kind of investment is now possible with the legal protection that we would need in order to seek it out and consider it. And I think that is the flex point that I think will launch this whole movement into a different level of success. Because, you know, we can't grow much faster than we have grown with the capital that we can generate internally from our operation.
And is that foundation or philanthropic body of capital the one that you're looking to that holds the most promise, or do you think there's other sources of capital through crowdfunding or other kinds of things that might play into this? You know,
I'm not sure about this. That's not an area of competence. But here's another thing about this movement, and it is really a movement, is that the benefit corporation is a huge benefit to us. We didn't do the work. We didn't hire lawyers to go lobby legislation in California to pass this legislation. Neither did the benefit corporations here do the work to pass the law in Minnesota. That was done by a whole level of talent and skill that is committed to the same goals, is to create an infrastructure that facilitates the growth of businesses that are committed to social goals. So the investment side, how capital can flow to benefit corporation, that's going to be solved by investment experts. And guess what? There are a lot of socially responsible investment experts that have the expertise, the legal and the tax expertise that I don't have and I never will have, and I don't want to have to pay for it or hire it done, that will provide the solution that makes sense for us because they're using their skill set, which is unique in a way that's compatible with our needs, and we're using our skill set and it's unique. And so that's why it's a collective effort. And a lot of the interesting work that's being done is done by experts that are really beyond my competence. So, but that'll happen, just like the benefit law happened. It just kind of dropped out of the air, and it was the right thing for us.
Good. One of the things that struck me is both of you talk about movements. Pat, you talked about a broad sense of movement and change and this creation of a fourth sector. In politics, we've often seen emerging parties begin to influence the major standing parties. And those parties then grab onto some of those ideas and change. Are we seeing that in business? I mean, we're seeing emerging social enterprises and benefit corporations and other things happening at that level, but we're also seeing the Plum Organics be bought by Campbell's Soup, the Honest Tea by Coca-Cola, and then places like Walmart starting to do things that you also see as being very important to a lot of different social groups and benefit corporations.
I see this in our students. I mean, the students I used to teach centuries ago were interested really in getting the best kinds of jobs for the most money. I see students now really interested in this kind of thing, of doing good and doing well, and figuring out how to do that. And some of them will fail. Some of these little businesses will fail. But I think this is where the action is, and this is where, if I can see it in business students, then I think it's in other students as well. I'm very positive about this being a long-term trend, not just a little flavor of the year kind of thing.
Well, I think it's a mistake to think of it as a single thing. I mean, it's one struggle on many, many fronts. I mean, the fact that Walmart is interested in putting solar on all of its buildings, that's a good thing. And, frankly, that should go forward. And they will, and other companies will, because of pressure from consumers, because of also internal dynamics. I mean, those are people that work at those companies that live in communities too. They feel the same kind of pressures to put their kids into school and paying for their health care bills and, protecting themselves against crime in their communities. So they will find ways through their organizational structures to produce social benefits to the extent that that's possible. We're trying to, but we think there's limitations to that because, the theory is can you get market rate returns with social benefits? And sometimes you can, but also sometimes you can't. So we're trying to create an alternative institutional flow that doesn't have to go through the mediation of private stockholders, so that the benefit goes directly to the community. But it's all part of a pattern. There's a ripple in the force here, and there are many efforts that are trying to find ways to connect resources that are clearly available to unmet needs that should not be unmet, And, I think what is unique is that business is now being used as a more assertive tool intentionally to produce social benefits first, not just financial returns to the employees. And that's something that's fundamentally new, because that did not happen 30 years ago. Those people were not coming into the business schools. They were not involved in business. They were doing other things. But now, this tool is being embraced, and it's a powerful tool. I mean, for $40,000 we invested 23 years ago, and that's produced millions of dollars worth of payroll, millions of dollars worth of donations, and that's the power of a small investment leveraged in a market economy to produce a benefit. The question is who gets the benefit, and that's, I think, what we're trying to re-engineer.
I'm delighted we got the idea of a ripple in the force into the conversation.
It's a Star Wars thing for you.
Oh, I know what it is.
I know you do. There's younger people here.
They've all seen Star Wars.
I'm going to ask Daryl if you got a question. I see Kim's going.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions here tweeted in. This is an interesting one. How does a benefit corporation stay competitive when it comes to attracting top talent if you don't have long-term compensation packages like stock awards?
You mean if you can't offer stock options to employees?
Yeah.
Well, how many people here have stock options in their companies they work for? Very few. Well, the rest of you aren't working or what? Most people don't. Most people don't make their living with stock options. So, yeah, you may miss some people, but, you don't. There's plenty of talent out there that doesn't require the stock options, that would rather actually have dollars and salaries. But if that's a fatal flaw, then we're going to have to figure that one out. If that's going to be necessary, then we're going to have to figure that out. And there are other ways. There's phantom stock. There is what we aren't willing to trade is a perpetual claim on profits after the contribution is long gone. So your grandchildren can't still benefit from the work that you did for 3 years and give something back. So but if you're a manager, you can come in and double our business in Sacramento when you make us $4 million. I don't have a problem paying you $2 million. But as soon as you leave the company, that $2 million that you got is going to come back to the company. But those are reasonable. Those are investments that have to be made. We compete for talent in the same way that we compete for customers. So we're not going to get a salesperson to accept a $70,000 check if they can get a $150,000 check from Staples. But Staples made $1.5 billion paying that $150,000. So we should be able to do things. Otherwise, we're bad business people. And if we are, then we shouldn't survive anyway.
We don't have a mechanism for taking a question from the audience, but if you have one, can you get something over and we'll pick it up?
Yeah, another question
Daryl.
is, are there tax benefits for benefit corporations? Are you making a go of it because you've got good tax benefits?
No, we're an S corporation in California, and we're a benefit corporation on top of the S corporation. So there's no charitable tax. We get deductions when we make charitable deductions of our profits. We get the same tax credit or tax deduction, charitable tax deduction, than any corporation does. Now, we give all of our profits away, so, we develop some tricks along those lines that are authorized by the IRS, by the way. So, our part of our stated marketing mission is to give our profits away, so we assume that brings us business. I'm not so sure if it actually does, but we assume from a legal point of view that it does. So, we can legally claim that some of our donations actually have a marketing purpose, even though we don't get anything in return. So, but no, we pay income taxes on lots of our donations. But that's all right. That's what pays for the highways, and that's what pays for, the Army and the Navy, and that's what pays for our schools and our, emergency rooms. So, companies should pay more taxes, not
Yeah,
less.
I think we actually have a lawyer in the audience who can maybe speak to that, yeah.
Yeah, I want to answer the tax question because I've said this over and over again. There are no tax benefits for benefit corporations. My question to you, Mike, is you're in the B2B space.
Yep.
But you've built a brand on a giving model. And you've brought up Staples, you've brought up some of these other competitors that are clearly also in the consumer space. Do you think that you could sort of transform your enterprise into a retail or consumer-facing enterprise now, or is it?
Probably not.
Let's try to rephrase the question.
So, that's a technical business type question. In other words, can we find a way to make a profit in the retail? By the way, the reason that Staples is buying Office Depot because Office Depot couldn't get out of the retail space fast enough. They're losing their shirts in the retail space. So is Staples. There's no money in the retail space. So the reason that they're not doing well now, the reason Office Max failed, because they got too much invested in the retail space and the retail space went away. Because, you can get that stuff at Amazon much cheaper and much faster. So if somebody could convince us that there was a legitimate business plan to make a profit in the retail space, then we jump into the retail space, but nobody's done that. And also, we don't know the retail space. I mean,
Social mission won't give you a more competitive advantage in the retail space.
I'm not sure our social mission gives us a competitive advantage now. Frankly, imagine you're the buyer of a major law firm that's got 400 attorneys, and you're the procurement manager, and you walk into the general partner and say, "Hey, we just threw out Staples, and we now give something back as our office supplier." They're gonna laugh at you unless they know who Give Something Back is. They're gonna say, "Oh my God, you're buying from some flaky nonprofit organization. How much are we paying for stuff now?" So then the name does not. The name does not resonate with what business consumers want, which is they want value they want dollar savings, they want next day delivery, they want service. And, they don't want to pay a premium price for a social benefit. Now, there are business models out there that ask their customers to pay a premium price for a social benefit. I mean, I've spent thousands of dollars on Girl Scout cookies. So believe me, I have daughters. So, and I know I could get those cookies cheaper at Costco if I really tried. Similar cookies. But, that's a $700 million business that's built on the sacrifice of its customers on behalf of the community. But our business model is not based on sacrifice of our customers. Our business model is on the lack of sacrifice on the part of the investors and stockholders. So, and we feel that is absolutely important. There's examples where I'm sure we have customers. We have a law firm in San Francisco we've been fighting with for years because they're paying too much for their products. We tell them, "You're paying too much for your products." And they say, "Well, we're doing well. We don't care. We like what you do." So we continue to tell them. We warn them, okay, if somebody else comes to steal our business and they say, "Oh my God, you're being screwed by Give Something Back," make sure that you tell them that we warned you about that. So, but that's not the way it should work. And you don't get to Staples size asking your customers to make sacrifices on your behalf or on somebody else's behalf. There is business there, but you can't make a profit long term.
Just to pick up on that, when you look at the Give Something Back website, it's everywhere. You just see donations, community, values, environment, green. It's all over the website. But when we talked about that, Mac said, "Well, that's not what our salespeople talk about when we go in and make that contact."
It takes a salesperson 5 minutes to figure out that when they knock on a door of a prospect, the first thing out of their mouth is, "Hey, help us donate profits of our company back to the community." No. They show them the door. No,
But
we
I have a question then. The name of your company doesn't sound like you sell paper clips. It Give Something Back.
It's a problem.
Sounds like a not-for-profit, lovely place.
This is a continuing problem. We hired a big marketing firm about 10 years ago because we were convinced the name was killing us in the market, or it wasn't helping us. And so we hired a big name. We didn't hire them; they did it pro bono, I think. And we said, are we hurting ourselves by not changing our name? Should we change our name to ABC Office Supplies, a community benefit corporation or something like that? So they interviewed our customers, they did focus groups, they did everything that these companies do to figure out whether or not you're marketed properly, and they came back and they said, "Geez, we have no idea. The name has." They said the name has such power, the name has such stickiness and power, but we can't determine whether or not it hurts you or helps you now. But I have always believed that there will come a point in the collective consciousness of the consumer population, business and individual, that the ability to hold these two seemingly contradictory ideas in your mind, that you can make a prudent financial business decision and at the same time benefit the community, that those kind of seemingly disconnected concepts will be acceptable in the collective consciousness. So, and I think we're closer to that. All the studies that are done saying that say, and these are many, many studies, that say business consumers and individual consumers by something like an 85% rate would prefer to do business from companies that demonstrate a positive impact in their communities. They clearly say they won't pay more, but they embrace that idea. And at some point, I think companies like us and the movement of people with us We'll drive that point home that it's possible, and you shouldn't just rule us out because we're a good company or, because you're a community. You should consider us on the merits, all the merits. So at some point, I would hope there's some kind of it may not be us that benefits from that. We could be long gone.
Daryl, do you have a question?
Well, yeah, we have a couple of questions that are centering on this. I guess the question has to do with the interesting claim that you can become a benefit corporation by just about stipulating anything as a benefit. So let's suppose I say, I'm going to be a benefit corporation, and my social benefit is to get cocaine use or cocaine legalized in the same way marijuana has been legalized.
Yeah.
So the question is there a danger that the benefit corporations movement will get tainted by benefit corporations being formed to pursue purposes that large numbers of people don't see as in any way beneficial?
Sure.
Do you see a danger there for
Yeah,
Pat?
of course there's a danger. I mean, there's a danger that, conventional companies will claim to be doing stuff that's, deceitful as well. But, those are dangers that we're very early into this process. That, the rules and regulations, the monitoring, the measurements and all that stuff. First of all, it's much easier now to measure than it used to be. And, measurement basically can be scaled very quickly and advertised very broadly so that if somebody does something bad, everyone in the world is going to know about it tomorrow. And, that's part of the process of democracy is to allow the citizenry to identify bad things and, and get the pitchforks out ready to attack the bad people. So, that's something that's really not, and also I think that works for the good companies too, that they will be rewarded and held accountable through transparency. And, we put out an annual report every year identifying who we gave the money to, how much, blah, 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 our financial statements. And I think that's the requirement of suggesting that you're doing something that's, non-traditional, that you're kind of expected and held accountable. One comment I wanted to make on the tax issue. 2 cities have introduced purchasing preferences for benefit corporations, Philadelphia and San Francisco. So when I bid a contract in San Francisco, if I'm within 4% of the low bid, I win because I'm a benefit corporation. So that's not a tax subsidy, but it's a purchasing preference akin to a minority-owned business, veterans-owned business, women-owned business, blah, blah, blah. So there is the beginning of an identification, and the theory behind that is not just a spurious, let's do the right thing San Francisco deal. It's measurement. I mean, there is documented evidence that San Francisco did that said there is a benefit to the community, a financially quantifiable benefit to the community to do business with a company that, first of all, gives its money back to nonprofits in San Francisco. And there's the 18% accelerator factor that's been studied all over the place for doing local businesses rather than national chains and stuff like that. So there is the beginning of a movement for government in its capacity to operate in the interests of its citizens, which is, the whole theory of government and democracy, by the way.
Rumor about that. Undocumented rumor.
That government is recognizing will get on board and help businesses that connect to the well-being of the communities that governments are supposed to embrace to help them amplify that benefit. So we'll see how it happens.
I want to come back to that question of accountability that Pat raised. The Minnesota statute, and I'm not the expert, she's sitting over there, requires that either for a specific or general benefit corporation, they have to produce an annual report talking about how they have pursued that benefit. And they do that against some third-party standard that's accepted, but that does not have to be audited. Now, if you look at major corporations, they're wrestling with this question of, well, we did a Global Reporting Initiative report, we did our community report, we did all these reports. Is anybody reading them? Are they actually making a difference to our customers? And how do you think about where are we going to find those reports? I mean, you put one out, it's right on your website, it's based on the B Corp framework. But as we look for reports, the question of who's holding them accountable. Now, I don't know that you ask that of a major corporation, traditional corporation. It's the shareholders or some legal entity.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? And Pat, what are you looking for in terms of trying to see whether a corporation is living up to its benefit purpose?
I think perhaps some You do have a public accountant, yes?
Us?
Yes.
Yeah, we have audited financial statements.
Yes, and I think seeing the audited financial statements and seeing where the money is going, actually, with an outside third party, I think that's absolutely critical.
Right.
And I know that you do it, but I don't know if all the benefit corporations do that.
Well, so in California, you are required to have a third party evaluate, audit you.
Good.
And so we use, and one of the third parties that's available in California is the B Corp certification. So we've been a B Corp since they started, and we're a certified B Corporation. So we submit and we're audited every 2 years, and we just got recertified this year. So that qualifies us for, and because, the state of California understands that that's a very high bar for social responsibility. But, we're easy. I mean, we don't have to measure our carbon footprint, or, we don't have to do all that, and that's tough to do. All we have to do is say, here's how much we made, and how much we give away. And none of it was distributed to the owners and stockholders. So that's all we claim we do, and that's not all we do, but that's our central mission embedded in our bylaws that we commit to doing.
But here, we do not have to have an audited benefit report. Am I correct?
Report is filed with the Minnesota Secretary of State here.
Yeah.
Most state statutes require some form of that's either provided to the shareholders or posted on the website. So there is external reporting available to the extent a consumer or a concerned person wants to go find it. There is no repository for those reports.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty flaky at this point.
Yeah.
In California, it's pretty flaky. I mean, nobody from the state of California has ever called me and said, hey, are you doing what you said you were going to do two years ago? Nobody's ever called me. Nobody's ever looking at that kind of. So it's very, very questionable at this point.
It is a question about whether or not anything will arise that will sort of serve as sort of an arbiter of the value of the proposition. But I think it's also whoever your consumer is looking at whether or not that's important to you. I mean, with public company practice, we look at what you have an investment in a public company, you might want to look at their annual financial statement and see what they said they're doing.
Well, and that, I think, puts a lot of responsibility in the company to make its reports visible and available
Yep.
to both its employees and to its
And if you lie,
customers.
there are people out there who can catch you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the value of public scrutiny, is that if you lie, you might get caught.
If you can find the reports. I mean, we started doing some research, and I'd say
Or if you
about
don't find the
20
reports, then,
about
you know,
20
then
to
you-
25% of the reports we can't find.
Yeah.
Well, it's only taken many, many decades to work out accounting standards, and we're
standards.
still working on that as well. So.
It's very early in the game, but, it's a different game now. That's the point. And so for companies who really do take this stuff seriously and see it as a tool to advance their missions, they have a whole new set of tools. For a bunch of, people who see it as an opportunity to, not do the right thing, but to benefit from the perception of doing the right thing, even who cares about them anyway? They're not gonna change the mechanism that produces what we're all kind of focused on changing.
Daryl, you have another question
Here we had
from our
another question from the audience. If you were starting over again and you were 21 years old, choosing a career, what advice, would you like to hear? What advice would you give to your younger self entering the business world?
Jeez. I don't know. Go to law school, maybe? I don't know. I loved being a professional student. Believe me, there's no better life than that. I think I've stumbled into what I was what meets my needs as a person, and also understanding that it was a complete accident for me. I mean, that 15 years when I kind of was accumulating all these skills, there was no intentionality to use these things later. I wasn't like gathering things with a plan. I just kind of stumbled into it. And then it worked. But also it wasn't just me. It was, I'm like an artifact of a larger kind of social movement, social thing because what we were doing was also happening in Philadelphia and Boston and Los Angeles and Seattle and Minneapolis. I mean, we all kind of, I think, were faced on the same sense of dissatisfaction with the way thing is, and figuring out what tools we had at our disposal to make some kind of a change and make a living at the same time. Because I make a very good living. I mean, she says all the sacrifices. I make a very good living.
I didn't say so.
And so let's not be. I'm not like Mother Teresa, who's I have a very nice motorcycle. I drive a Prius that gets me around town. So I have a very comfortable life. And And, most people in my position don't own the company anyway. They're doing the same thing I do. They work just as hard. And ultimately, I'm not going to own the company as soon as you figure out the transitional strategy anyway. So,
Really strikes me as a remarkable alignment between personal values and organizational structure, legal structure even.
that's why I think that my college experience was what stamped me. And normally you'd see me teaching sociology somewhere. But, somehow or other, this is where I ended up because the opportunity existed. Let me tell you one story, because she hit on the e-waste thing. All companies gather assets as they grow. So, we have trucks, we have warehouses, we have, talent, all that kind of stuff. And companies routinely sit around the planning session. They figure, how do we utilize our assets in ways that can bring additional value to our stakeholders? Usually meaning the stockholders, how do we bring more profit to the bottom line? But, we have a different conversation. So we really do find it's kind of a routine business process where we find ways to use assets that aren't fully deployed in ways that bring community value. Here's a really simple one. It just came to us one day. I don't know why it didn't come to us early, but we are close by a food bank. Alameda County Food Bank provides food to all the the hungry people in Alameda County. Their big problem is that they have so many food pickup locations that they can't service with their trucks because they don't have trucks. They have to hire trucks. It costs them thousands of dollars. Well, guess what? We got trucks rolling around the cities all day long. So there's 10 Safeways within 5 miles of our warehouse in San Leandro that services Alameda County. So we worked out with them saying, let us be your trucks. So when our trucks come back to the warehouse, they're empty. They each carry 2 empty barrels in there. So they go by the Safeways and they're on their route home. They pick up the full barrels, bring them to our warehouse, leave the empty barrels. It doesn't cost us a dime. It takes us maybe, half a mile out of our route. And it saves the food bank thousands and thousands of dollars because they don't have to hire trucks to go pick these barrels up. And it's a simple little thing. And, that works just as well for Office Depot. So, we haven't talked to them yet, but, we're going to talk to them next Thanksgiving when the food banks go crazy and saying, hey, why don't let's go to Berkeley and get somebody to develop an app that all the available empty trucks can swing by all the available empty stores and pick up the bags, pick up the stuff and bring it to central locations and take thousands and thousands of dollars off the food bank's costs so that they can just spend all their time distributing the food instead of collecting it. And, it's just simple little use of an unutilized resource that comes into frame once you think about how do we use it in a way that provides benefit to our community. So we have people all the time thinking of stuff like that. And, it's kind of just a small little change of thinking process that produces these unbelievable community benefits. So,
one more thought. When you talk to major corporations, General Mills, 3M, Target, you find that one of the arguments they advance for promoting corporate responsibility, social engagement, environmental initiatives, whatever, is that it resonates with their own employees. And if you've seen that in your employee base as a benefit, well, even before you were a benefit corporation, the purposes of your business, has that really engaged employees in a different way that you feel?
Absolutely. Absolutely engages employees. What it doesn't do is it doesn't turn an unproductive employee into a productive employee. I can't tell you how many employees haven't worked out who came in, I hate selling, but I know I could sell your stuff because I'm totally committed to the values of your company. And, their first 3 days out in the field, they crash and burn. Because, the jobs that our employees do are jobs they have to do as well as their competitors on the other side of the equation. So, yes, our longest, most successful salespeople is leaving the company after 17 years. She's bored. I don't know how she lasted 17 years, but she makes a lot of money. She's going to work for American Express. And tomorrow's her last day. But, she would have left 15 years ago or 12 years ago, because she's so talented. She would have left 12 years ago or 10 years ago if she wasn't totally committed to the company mission. So, yes, we derived some benefit, but it didn't make her any better as a salesperson. It made her a more committed employee. But, benefit corporations do not have the luxury of carrying mission-related employees who can't produce at a level necessary to compete with the people who are trying to take you out of the picture. And I think that's one of the first things you have to learn if you have a social mission, is that you can't have a socially responsible business if you don't have a business, a successful business. You know, that's the sine qua non of the whole equation, is you have to have a successful business, which means you have to have productive employees, and whether or not they buy into the mission. There's a benefit if they do, but if they do, it doesn't make them better employees or more productive employees.
Thank you.
I think on that note, we'll end what I hope you found a really stimulating presentation. The idealism comes through, but you also get the real hard-headed, approach to business coming through as well. As you say, you can't be socially responsible business if you don't have a business. On that note, I'd like to thank our speaker, Michael Hannigan.
Oh, is it just like some office supply product?
Wait and see. Also, Pat Werehain for stimulating comments.
Thank you.
And for you, David, thank you so much for your great job as a moderator.
I've already got one of those, but I'll find some good
Oh, you
use
know what
for
it is?
Yeah. Well, you can take it on the airplane, I think. They won't, get you by
Is it legal in
the
California?
TSA. And on behalf of the Center for Ethical Business Cultures, we would like to give Mike a copy of this history that we wrote along with Ken and Pat, Corporate Responsibility, the American Experience, and thank you for a very engaging walk down the path of a benefit corporation.
I'd love to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that concludes our evening events tonight. Remember, on the way out, if you want to pick up a copy of the free book, please do so. And thank you so much.
I don't know if you want to take it home.
Oh, yeah, I travel light, so I got plenty of room. Wonderful.
Really?
Just great, guys. Just
Good,
great.
good. Oh,
Thank you. Just fabulous. I could tell the audience was really engaged.
I'm glad you told the food-based story. I couldn't tell what it was good.